the revolution, suffered a revolution. Despite that, in 50 years, from the most backward European country to a global superpower rivaling the United States. It's the most stunning economic development story in the world until one other country has that kind of short-term transformation from a backward agrarian country to a modern industrial power. And what's that? China. Isn't that interesting? Russia and China. In terms of economic development, nobody holds a candle. Nobody. To what they achieved against those odds. But they couldn't sustain it, neither in Russia nor in China. They couldn't hold on to the redistribution of wealth. It is now going back to what it was. They couldn't hold on to the redistribution of power. It's now going back to what it was before the revolution. So we as Marxists have to ask the question, what was missing? What enabled all of those breakthroughs not to be sustained? And my answer to you would be, they didn't change the organization of the surplus. They didn't change how it's produced, who produces it, who gets it, how it's distributed, and to whom. They neglected what we're going to spend most of today talking about. And I think it cost them as dearly as any neglect of anything ever cost anybody. And you know, that argument, I didn't make that up. That's Marx's argument. Obviously not about the Russian Revolution. He died before that. But Marx's argument, which you recall, was to ask himself a similar question. Why did the French Revolution's goals of liberty, equality, fraternity never get realized? Why did the promise that capitalism gave to everybody, let's get rid of feudalism, let's have capitalism, because it brings with it liberty, equality, and fraternity? Why was that promise never delivered on? Why was that promise broken? That was the question Marx asked. And that's why he turned against capitalism, because his research, his thinking said, capitalism is not only not bringing us liberty, equality, fraternity, it is itself a major obstacle. Something more has to be transformed. We have to go beyond capital. That was an analysis comparable to our asking in our generation, what went wrong in Russia and China? Why are they what they are? What happened there? And I think this surplus argument is the way to go. If you are interested, and I excuse myself to begin modesty, but what am I going to do? With a colleague of mine, a person I write with a lot, I spent 10 years of my life with this colleague trying to answer the question, what happened in the Soviet Union? And if you are interested, there is a book. It's called Class, Theory, and History, because that's really what it is. And then it has a subtitle, Capitalism and Communism in the USSR. Okay. That book was published in 2002 by the British publisher, some of you will have heard of them, Routledge. It's a huge corporation. It's a subsidiary of something called Taylor and Francis, which is one of the 5 biggest publishing companies in the world. And Routledge is one of their labels. Modern publishers put out books under many different labels for different audiences. And you can get that. That's available in hardback. It's also available in paperback. It is in print. You can get it anywhere. But if you're interested in the detailed working out of what I just told you about the Soviet Union, that would be the place to go. Okay. So that's what we're all focused on. We're focused on this analysis of the surplus. This contribution, this peculiar contribution of Marx, which says that's what we have to look at. And most of what we're going to do today is examine not so much the production of surplus, because we did that last week. Remember the story? I did it for you several different ways. The worker who goes and signs, finally after dickering with an employer, a deal. I will come and I will work here 40 hours a week. I'll come at 9, I'll leave at 5, and you will pay me $22 an hour. And I asked you all in a dramatic way as much as I could, do you follow me in the simple logic that there is no way the employer would pay the worker $22 an hour unless in that hour you, the worker, produce more goods and services for your employer to take and sell than $22 worth. In other words, the whole logic, the whole point of employment is that you, the worker, in capitalism, you must produce your labor, your brains, your muscle, must add to the product being produced in the place you work. Good or service, doesn't matter. You must add in an hour more than they pay you to come there to do the work. Because if you don't keep the job. The job is, you'll find it. It makes no sense for an employer to give you $22 if in doing that hour you add $20 worth of materials for him to sell. He will then fire you. And probably won't be nice about it either. Okay? So this is the way in capitalism it works out. The capitalist gives you money. This is the form. I'm going to pay you. You're going to come and do work for me. I'm not going to force you. It's all voluntary. We even have the language. You look for a job. You want one. And the employer, look, notice the language, gives you a job. What a kind person. He's giving you something. I have a job for you. This is a way of disguising what Marxian theory says is going on. He isn't giving you. You are giving him. You are giving him surplus. You're giving him more than he hires you, because he won't hire you otherwise. Nothing personal. That's the system. He can't stay in business if he doesn't do that. Much as he likes you, staying in business is more urgent for him. So in capitalism, we have a peculiar ritual, very different than in slavery. In slavery, I own you. And because I own you and property means certain things, I can set you to work. I can tell you to do this and to do that, and you must. Because you are like my donkey. I own you. I feed you, I sustain. By the way, same thing happens. Slave produces more than the slave gets. Surplus is produced. But the relationship, how it's organized, is a little different. Capitalism is the one Marx was interested in. And so capitalism is what we're going to focus on. But I'm not going to do it the way Marx does it in Capital exactly, because he's describing a capitalism in mid-19th century Europe. I am going to describe the capitalism now. Same theory, same application, no problem, but on idioms, I'm going to draw from current situations, because those are familiar to you, and it'll be easier for you to follow. Okay, so let's begin then. First, let's make sure that you all understand the basic logic of what a capitalist does. And that is captured by this complicated looking formula, but it isn't. Marx is very good. He knows his mathematics, but he sticks to very simple examples, simple numerical examples, simple algebra, very simple. And that's not only because he wants to communicate, which of course he does, but also because most of the ideas in economics are very simple. And the elaborate gobbledygook that my profession specializes in, I was just discussing this with someone before we started, it really you should have a sense of humor about it. What economists do is a kind of variation on what lawyers do. Lawyers take a simple, I don't mean to offend any lawyers. You know, I don't mind offending them, I kind of like it, but I don't mean to offend them. A lawyer takes a simple idea and then writes it up in an unbelievable language so that he can charge you to translate it back to the simple idea that it always was. If it was left simply, what would you need a lawyer for? Right? So economists do that too. In order to create professional jobs and professorships and things like that, we make it terribly complicated with as much arithmetic and scientific dress as we can manage to intimidate most of the people so that they feel inadequate, incapable. It's a mystery. It's very religious, this whole business. But it's a secular religion of economics. So Marx doesn't want that. He's not a professor. He has no chance to be a professor. Remember, we talked about his brief history a little bit. So he's interested in communicating to people, so he doesn't do that. But if you go into the profession now, Marxists and not, you'll see a lot of impenetrable language and complications, but they do not help us very much. Anyway, here's the idea. By the way, this equation is taken directly from Marx. This is in the early chapters of Volume 2 of Capital. If you want to see where Marx himself develops it, that's where he does it. But it's a simple idea. A capitalist is a person who starts with money. He enters the market with money. And he uses the money to buy C. C stands for commodities, things. He buys things. What does he buy? Means of production, MOP, tools, equipment, and raw materials. And LP, labor power. Marx's term for what the worker sells. What you and I sell to an employer is our labor power, our ability to work. The employer tells us what to do, how to do, where to do it, how to do it with what regime. We don't determine any of that. All we sell is the sort of raw capacity to do it to an employer. So the employer starts with money and he buys a commodity. He enters the market and buys things. Tools, equipment, and raw materials, and he hires workers. He buys labor power from workers. Then the capitalist does an interesting thing, and Marx loves to play with the language. The capitalist, he says, having bought something with money, does with his purchases what everybody does with a purchase. He consumes it. He literally consumes it. How does a capitalist consume tools, equipment, raw material, and labor power? By setting them to work. That's the way a capitalist consumes equipment, workers. He puts them to work, and that's what the P stands for, the process of production. And why does the capitalist do that? Because he wants this process of production to result in, to end up in C prime, another commodity, something different from the tools, equipment, and raw materials, and different from the labor power. So to give you an example, let's suppose this is a chair capitalist. He has money, he buys lumber, saws, nails, glue, and he hires carpenters or he hires woodworkers. And he sets them to work. He says, okay, you're going to do this with this equipment on that raw material, and you're going to make C prime, another commodity. It's different from the commodities with which you began. They are in it, that is the wood, the nails, the glue, they're all in it, but they're different from it. And how are they different? They're different because the work that has been done on these commodities has transformed them into that. The worker transforms the lumber and the nails and the glue into the chair. And then, under the rules of capitalism, when you finish making chairs, you go home. The chairs belong to the employer. You did the work, but you don't get the results of your labor. You are separated, instantly, automatically, unquestionably. You don't get the fruits of your labor. That's the